Chicago has always held a certain allure for me. There's something about the towering skyscrapers that seem to pierce the cloudy Midwestern sky, a tangible reminder that ambition rules this city. The wind cutting between buildings can feel ruthless, but it also carries a collective drive, an energy that's hard to describe unless you've walked those bustling streets yourself. When I first accepted a job offer at a prestigious consulting firm in the heart of downtown, I believed I was stepping onto the path I'd dreamed of since college. I wanted the success, the thrill of competition, the sense that I was building something bigger than myself. I wanted my name associated with those shining buildings of glass and steel. Walking into the office that first day was like entering another world. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered sweeping views of Lake Michigan. The lobby was all polished marble floors, minimalist furniture, and hushed conversations echoing through pristine hallways. People moved with purpose, clad in sharp suits and immaculate outfits, their steps a rhythmic percussion that underscored the silent hum of ambition. I remember thinking, this is it. I made it. At first, I felt like just another face behind a sleek laptop, another cog in a massive corporate machine that demanded perfection. My department specialized in strategic analysis for big-name clients, the sort whose logos you see on billboards. Though I worked diligently, even passionately, I sometimes wondered if anyone really noticed. I was good at what I did, but so were dozens of other analysts. We blended together like typed lines on an endless spreadsheet. But there was one person who always seemed to notice me, whether I wanted her to or not. Her name was Catherine Blake, and she was my direct supervisor, though boss might be more accurate. She was the head of the entire department, a position that placed her only a few rungs down from the senior executives. I'd known her only by reputation at first, stern, brilliant, and decisive, with a laser focus that allegedly sent subpar employees scrambling for cover. In person, she was even more imposing. Catherine was tall and elegant, with platinum blonde hair styled in a perfect chignon that seemed to defy gravity. She dressed in crisp, tailored suits or sleek dresses that never revealed more than they should, but always exuded a quiet power. People said that at meetings, her words had the precision of scalpel strikes, cutting through any nonsense to expose the core truth of a situation. When Catherine spoke, everyone else listened. I will never forget the first time her eyes pinned me across a conference room table. We were discussing a high-stakes project for a big pharmaceutical client, and I'd been forced to present part of the slide deck. My voice shook, but I made sure to keep my gaze steady, scanning the faces of the senior staff. When my eyes met hers, it felt like I'd come face to face with a surge of electricity. There was no sense of kindness or cruelty in that look, only an intense, evaluating intelligence. I remember feeling strangely exhilarated. I wanted to impress her, to see approval flicker in her piercing blue eyes. To my immense relief, the meeting ended well. Catherine uttered a quiet, "Good job" as she left the room, and I felt my cheeks heat. I tried to convince myself that was just the typical desire for recognition from someone in authority. But there was something else there, something I couldn't quite name. A spark, maybe, that lingered even as she disappeared into her private corner office. Over the following months, I worked tirelessly, perfecting my analysis, streamlining presentations, hoping for more of Catherine's rare praise. She was known for her high expectations, and I was determined to meet them. On the occasions I succeeded, her compliments, though brief, felt like beams of sunlight through storm clouds, warming me in ways that unsettled me more than I liked to admit. But somewhere along the line, my admiration started to become complicated. I noticed the way her posture commanded every room she entered, the subtle grace in every movement of her hands, her crisp, sophisticated perfume that lingered in the hallways. During group meetings, I felt her gaze settle on me more often than on others. A couple of times, I even thought I saw a faint smile tugging at her lips in response to something I said. A small voice in my head insisted I was reading too much into it. She's just a good boss who notices your dedication, I told myself. She sees potential in you. Yet a part of me, a part I tried very hard to silence, couldn't help but wonder if there was something deeper, some intangible current flowing between us. I was reluctant to voice these thoughts to anyone. The office was a breeding ground for rumors, and I had no interest in becoming the central character in any salacious gossip. But the tension was there, at least for me. I didn't know how she felt, if she felt anything at all. For a while, I managed to push the thought aside, immersing myself in spreadsheets and client calls, burying any confusion under the tidy veneer of corporate ambition. However, the problem with ignoring something real is that it rarely goes away. Sooner or later, tension reveals itself, turning even the simplest interactions into potential turning points. And in a place as high stakes as my office, any emotional misstep had consequences. I just didn't yet realize how profound those consequences would be. One Wednesday morning, the firm was in overdrive. We had 2 major client deliverables due, plus a big internal presentation that Catherine insisted on reviewing personally. I prepped all night to ensure my slides were flawless. By the time I arrived at the office, I was running on caffeine and adrenaline, my mind buzzing. The presentation went smoothly. No small feat, given that senior executives, Catherine included, were present. I was acutely aware of her presence in the corner of the room, arms crossed, her gaze laser-focused on me. This was my moment to shine, I told myself. I delivered the slides with confidence, glancing in her direction now and again to gauge her reaction. When I finished, the room erupted in polite applause. Catherine stepped forward. "Excellent work," she said, her voice as calm and refined as ever. But that gaze, there was an intensity in it that made my pulse flutter. The faintest smile curved on her lips, a smile that felt oddly personal, as if it were meant for me alone. She briefly placed her hand on my shoulder, barely a touch, more of a light press. Most people in the room probably didn't even notice. But I did. Time seemed to stretch for an odd second, her fingers lingering longer than one might expect from a perfunctory gesture. A warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the stressful environment. It was a confusing, disorienting sensation that I couldn't compartmentalize as just pride in a job well done. In the days that followed, I wrestled with a swirl of conflicting feelings. On the one hand, I rationalized that this might be how Catherine encouraged promising employees, through subtle, strategic signs of approval. On the other hand, each time I replayed that moment in my head, I remembered the whisper of her perfume, the firmness of her hand on my shoulder, and the quiet confidence in her eyes. Those small interactions began adding up. She called me into her office more often to discuss project details. Sometimes we'd talk business for a few minutes, and then the conversation would drift to more personal topics. She'd ask how I was managing stress, or if I had any big weekend plans. I'd answer politely, carefully, trying not to give away how my heart raced under her attention. She seemed engaged, genuinely curious, but I couldn't shake the impression that she was watching me, studying me in ways unrelated to job performance. Self-doubt tugged at me. Am I imagining this? Is there an undercurrent, or am I just reading into her behavior because she's powerful and I'm flattered by the attention? Soon enough, I grew to expect a certain energy in the air whenever she and I were together. It was like we inhabited a private, invisible bubble, still professional on the surface, but humming with an unspoken tension. Each time we parted ways, I felt a mix of relief and disappointment. Relief because I knew I could only mask my own feelings for so long. Disappointment because a part of me wanted to see how far this might go. Yet behind the curiosity burned a low-level alarm. Office relationships were fraught with complications under the best of circumstances. With Catherine as my direct boss, the complications multiplied tenfold. Power imbalances, career risks, potential gossip, none of it boded well for either of us. Every time my heart fluttered at her compliments, my mind reminded me that I could be playing with fire. To quell my internal conflict, I threw myself even more intensely into my work. I convinced myself that if I stayed busy enough, I could outrun these feelings. But that was a lie, and deep down, I knew it. Something was building between us, a tension that neither of us could deny forever. The real question was, what would happen when it finally broke through the surface? One night, the office was nearly deserted. Only a handful of people were still there, hunched over spreadsheets or preparing for early morning meetings. I was among them, tapping away at my laptop under the fluorescent lights that never seemed to grow dim. A half-eaten sandwich perched on the edge of my desk. Dinner, in my world. Sometime around 9 p.m., I heard footsteps approach. When I glanced up, Catherine stood in the doorway to my cubicle. The ambient light cast a soft glow around her figure, and for a split second, I felt a jolt of nerves. "You always work so late," she remarked. Her tone wasn't reproachful. It was almost concerned. "You can't sustain that pace forever." I shrugged, trying to look casual even as my pulse began to race. "I have deadlines," I replied, forcing a small smile. "I don't mind staying late if it helps me stay ahead." She nodded thoughtfully, then took a few steps closer, her heels clicking on the polished floor. "I know you have ambitions," she said quietly, "but there's more to life than this office. I wasn't sure how to respond. Catherine had never approached me so directly about work-life balance, or, for that matter, about anything personal in such a candid way. The silence stretched, and my heartbeat seemed loud in my own ears. She lifted a hand and placed it gently on my upper arm. The warmth of her palm seeped through my blouse. "Come on," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Let me walk you out. You can pick this up again tomorrow." Her nearness filled my senses with the subtle hint of her perfume. I swallowed, feeling something shift inside me. This wasn't typical boss behavior, not by any metric. I just need to send one last email," I managed, my throat tight. Catherine didn't move away, didn't lift her hand. "All right," she acquiesced. "I'll wait." With that, she slipped into the empty cubicle next to mine, which belonged to a colleague. She leaned against the desk, arms crossed, watching me. I tried to compose my email, but my hands trembled on the keyboard. The words on the screen blurred as I typed something, anything, to get it done. My entire consciousness was tethered to the presence behind me. I could feel her energy in the air. When I hit send, I sat back and exhaled shakily. "Done," I said, turning my chair around to face her. "Shall we?" Catherine nodded and gestured for me to follow. We made our way down the corridor in silence. The overhead lights hummed softly. I could hear my own footsteps echo as we passed row after row of empty workstations. Finally, we reached a corner area where the large glass windows looked out onto the Chicago skyline, glittering with 1,000 lights. I expected us to keep walking, to head for the elevators. But she stopped, standing by the window, her gaze directed at the cityscape outside. "It looks beautiful at night, doesn't it?" she mused. "Sometimes I forget to appreciate it." I hesitated, then stepped up beside her. Through the glass, I could see Lake Michigan in the distance, dark and calm. "Yeah," I said softly. "I do too, sometimes." She turned toward me. Her expression was gentle, yet focused. My heart thudded, and a wave of trepidation washed over me. "I need to be honest," she said in a low voice. "I've tried to ignore what's been happening between us, but I can't. Not anymore." My entire body tensed, a strange mix of hope and fear coursing through my veins. Could this really be happening? What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Catherine stepped closer, and I caught the refined scent of her perfume again. My breath hitched as her hand lifted to brush a stray hair from my forehead, so gently it was almost an ache. "If you don't want this, you should say so," she murmured. Her lips were inches from mine. I froze, and 1,000 thoughts firing off in my head. This is wrong. This is your boss. What if someone sees? What if you jeopardize your career? But overshadowing them all was a raw, undeniable pull. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Then Catherine closed the distance between us, pressing her lips to mine in a brief, intense kiss. For a moment, the world seemed to vanish. The hum of the office lights, the city beyond the glass, all of it was gone. There was only the heat of her mouth, the soft press of her body, and a surge of feeling so strong it left me lightheaded. When we parted, my lungs felt starved for air. Catherine's gaze searched mine, 1,000 questions in her eyes. She seemed uncertain for once, as if waiting for me to reject her, but I found no words to push her away. Everything in me buzzed with the realization that I'd wanted this, even craved it. Words failed me, but my silence spoke volumes. She exhaled, relief flickering across her face. I shouldn't have done that," she said quietly, though her hand still rested lightly on my arms. "But I can't pretend anymore." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of a line irreversibly crossed. "Me neither," I whispered. In that moment, everything changed. That night replayed in my mind on a continuous loop. Even as I tried to conduct business as usual the next day, answering emails, assembling project reports, I felt an undercurrent of excitement and anxiety thrumming inside me. I was barely able to focus, anticipating the next time our paths might cross. Yet, Catherine and I said nothing about our kiss in the immediate aftermath. We only exchanged loaded glances and polite greetings in front of coworkers. Behind those outward formalities, however, a secret bound us together. After a few days, Catherine summoned me to her office. My stomach flipped anxiously as I walked through the door, half expecting her to tell me it had all been a mistake. But the moment I stepped inside, she quietly shut the door behind me, her eyes softening in a way I'd never seen from her in a professional setting. "I've scheduled this meeting because I need an update on your deliverables," she said, her voice pitched so that any eavesdropper might think we were discussing routine matters. Then she motioned to a set of seats near a small round table in the corner of her spacious office. "Let's sit." I complied. Once seated, she leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "We should talk," she said softly, her gaze intense. "About what happened the other night? About where we go from here?" My pulse hammered in my ears. "I'm not sure," I said honestly. "I've been trying to figure that out myself," she sighed, running a manicured hand over her immaculate chignon. "I don't want to do anything that makes you uncomfortable or that jeopardizes your career," she began. "I also know that if word of this gets out, it won't look good for either of us." Her words drummed up all the anxieties that had plagued me. 1,000 worst-case scenarios flickered through my mind. Accusations of favoritism, rumors that could tear our department apart, the possibility of losing everything I'd worked for. Then there was the moral aspect. Was it right to continue something like this? If I had an ounce of self-preservation, I'd walk away. And yet, despite all the logical reasons to steer clear, I felt a powerful pull to her that defied common sense. "I can't pretend I don't want this," I admitted, my voice shaky. "But I also don't know how we navigate this without consequences." Catherine studied me with that discerning gaze of hers. "I'm not asking you to pretend," she said gently, "but we have to be cautious. She paused, exhaling as if summoning courage. "I've never been in this situation before, where my feelings conflict with my professional role." Hearing that admission cut through some of my fear. There was a tenderness in her eyes that made me realize she was just as uncertain, just as vulnerable in this as I was. "So what do we do?" I asked. She gave a small, humorless laugh. "If I had a neat solution, I'd tell you. But I don't. Maybe we take things slowly, very slowly, and keep it between us. For now, at least." My stomach twisted at the thought of secrecy, but I knew it was the only viable option if we wanted to explore whatever this was. "Okay," I agreed quietly, the word carrying both relief and the first pang of guilt. "We'll keep it private." She nodded. "If at any point you feel uncomfortable, tell me. We can't let this spiral out of control." I didn't voice it, but I knew there was no controlling the emotions already spinning inside me. Still, I managed a nod, pushing aside my misgivings. "I understand." As I left her office, I felt both liberated and confined by this arrangement. We had given ourselves permission to explore something real, but we'd also erected an invisible boundary, one that demanded absolute discretion. I sensed it wouldn't be simple, but I didn't anticipate how quickly it would become complicated. In the weeks that followed, we fell into a precarious dance. By day, we maintained our roles as boss and employee, exchanging polite professional remarks. By night, we stole moments, riding the elevator down together at the end of a long day, leaning against the wall of the underground parking lot to share brief, hungry kisses, or texting each other in coded language that, to an outsider, would seem purely work-related. Each encounter felt electric, a stolen thrill. But the adrenaline of secrecy was accompanied by a creeping sense of conflict in my heart. I delved into online resources about workplace romances, reading cautionary tales of careers ruined, lawsuits filed, humiliations endured. Every article reminded me of how precarious this was. Yet what ate at me even more was the subtle shift in how I viewed Catherine and how I suspected she viewed me. Our connection wasn't just physical attraction. We talked about our families, our past relationships, our aspirations. We shared an unexpected intimacy in those quiet hours outside the office. And that intimacy made it all the more complicated. I began to sense that I was in danger of falling for her, not just as a fantasy, but as a person. The thought terrified me. An affair was one thing, but genuine emotional attachment, that could break me in ways I wasn't prepared for. Everything came to a head one evening after a client dinner. Catherine had insisted I attend alongside her and 2 junior associates. We spent hours networking with the clients, making small talk, and discussing future initiatives. Throughout the evening, Catherine and I exchanged clandestine glances, her foot occasionally brushing mine under the table. Afterward, she offered to drive me home, claiming her car service had room for one more passenger. In truth, she had dismissed the driver entirely and slipped behind the wheel of her own car, guiding me inside with a soft urgency that sent my pulse racing. As we left the restaurant district behind, the city lights formed a kaleidoscope of neon and traffic. "You did well tonight," she remarked, glancing at me from the driver's seat. "The clients respect your insights." A flush of pride blossomed in my chest. "Thank you," I said softly. I turned to look out the window, the world blurred by passing streetlights. Her voice lowered. "I'd like to talk more, if you don't mind. I know a place where we can get a nightcap. Or just talk." Her hesitation was uncharacteristic of her usual confidence. I hesitated, but only for a second. "Sure," I said. We ended up at her apartment, high in an upscale building that overlooked the Chicago River. I'd never been there before. Everything about the space, polished floors, tasteful modern art, a floor-to-ceiling view of the shimmering skyline, reflected her sophisticated taste. Yet, there was a quiet warmth to the space. Plush rugs, soft lighting, and a few personal photographs on a side table. It struck me that this was Catherine Blake's home, not just some curated image. She draped her coat over a chair and loosened the top button of her blouse, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. "Make yourself comfortable," she said, gesturing toward a white leather sofa. "I'll get us something to drink." I settled onto the couch, heart pounding. My gaze wandered over her bookshelves, filled with texts on business strategy, psychology, and travel guides for exotic locales. A faint sense of unreality washed over me. I was in my boss's apartment, about to share a private moment that no one else in the world would know about. When Catherine returned, she carried 2 glasses of wine. She handed me one, then sat next to me. Not too close, but near enough that I felt the warmth of her body. We sipped in silence for a while, the only sound the distant hum of traffic and the faint swirl of wind against the windows. Finally, she turned to me. "I think about you constantly," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "At first, I told myself it was just attraction, but tonight, seeing you handle yourself with such poise, I realized it's more than that." Her honesty kindled a spark of both delight and dread in me. I studied the dark red liquid in my glass. "I feel the same," I admitted, my heart thumping. "This isn't just some passing fancy for me, either." She set her glass down on the coffee table and reached for my hand. "Then let's not pretend anymore," she murmured, pulling me gently closer. Our lips met, and the kiss was deeper, more urgent than any we'd shared before. The tension of weeks of secrecy poured into that moment, a collision of longing and trepidation. I could sense her letting go of the composed facade she wore at the office, revealing vulnerability and need that mirrored my own. Her hands moved over my back, guiding me closer still. My pulse thundered in my ears, my mind spinning with the knowledge of how dangerous this was. But all that faded under the sheer intensity of being with her. For a moment, the world beyond her apartment ceased to exist. Of course, real life doesn't pause just because 2 people become entangled in a secret relationship. The morning after that passionate night at her apartment, I woke at dawn, still in her bed, disoriented by the golden light pouring through the panoramic windows. My head throbbed slightly from the wine, but my chest felt heavier with something else. The dawning realization of what we'd just done. She was awake too, propped up against the pillows, watching me with concern. "I can hear the gears in your head turning," she teased gently, but her eyes were serious. I exhaled, rolling to face her. This is real now. It's not just a few stolen kisses. I don't know how to handle what comes next." She reached out to brush her thumb over my cheek. "We handle it one day at a time," she said. "If this is truly something we both want, we'll find a way." I tried to let her confidence steady me, but as soon as I left her apartment, the outside world descended. I took a cab home, changed clothes, and hurried to the office, arriving a bit later than usual. I spent the rest of the day on edge, expecting suspicious glances or pointed questions. Catherine maintained her usual impeccable composure in the office. If she was nervous, she didn't show it. But I felt as though everyone must be able to see how my cheeks warmed whenever she walked by. Then the rumors started. Small, whispered things at first. An offhand comment from a coworker about how Catherine seemed especially attentive toward me. Another remark about how I'd been called into her office an unusually high number of times. The office rumor mill was notoriously creative. Soon, I caught snippets that Catherine had a favorite, and that I was benefiting from special treatment. I tried to brush it off, to act casual, but the tension burrowed deeper. At night, Catherine and I continued to meet in private, sometimes in her apartment, sometimes at a discreet bar on the other side of town. But the more we indulged in our connection, the more our professional environment felt precarious. My face grew hot every time I heard a new rumor, and Catherine's brow furrowed when I told her. "It'll blow over," she reassured me one evening. "Workplaces thrive on gossip. Eventually, They'll move on to something else. But she underestimated the vigilance of our firm's human resources department. A few weeks later, I received an email summoning me to a confidential discussion with HR. My stomach dropped at the sight. I half considered telling Catherine, but she was in back-to-back meetings, and I didn't want to alarm her prematurely. When I arrived in the HR manager's office, I was greeted with a polite, professional smile that felt unnervingly hollow. "We've received some anonymous reports," the manager said, "alleging that you and Mr. Blake may be engaged in a relationship that goes beyond the professional scope. We'd like to discuss it." My heart hammered. Anonymous reports? The rumor mill had escalated to official channels. "I'm not sure what you mean," I began, feigning confusion. The manager folded her hands on the desk. "We're not here to pass judgment at this point, but as you know, the company has strict policies against relationships that involve direct reporting lines due to concerns over favoritism and potential legal ramifications. We need to investigate." I felt cornered, like a startled animal. My mind whirled, trying to calculate possible responses. Denying it outright could backfire if they found any proof. Admitting it would open the door to major consequences, for both of us. So I settled on the vaguest deflection I could muster. "Ms. Blake and I work closely together because I'm on many of her projects. I don't believe we're in violation of any policies." The manager's expression was neutral, but not unsympathetic. "If the rumors are baseless, then you have nothing to worry about," she said calmly. "Just keep in mind, any behavior that crosses professional lines could be detrimental not only to you, but also to Ms. Blake. We simply want to protect everyone involved." I nodded, forcing a polite smile before leaving the office in a daze. Later, Catherine found me on my lunch break, pulling me aside into an empty conference room. Her expression was grim. "HR spoke to me, too," she said, jaw set. "They have complaints of an inappropriate relationship. I tried to shut it down, but there might be an investigation. They want to see phone records, meeting logs, everything." Fear coiled in my stomach. "This could ruin you," I whispered. "If they find evidence..." She raked a hand through her hair, looking momentarily uncomposed. "I know. Let me handle it. I'll tell them it's all misunderstanding, that you're just a top performer I'm mentoring." My breath caught. Mentoring. Right. I realized with a cold clarity that Catherine might be forced to throw me under the bus if things escalated. She wouldn't do that intentionally, but who knows what corporate pressure could do. She'd worked her whole life to reach this position. The thought made my heart clench. What are we doing? I asked myself. Is this truly worth the risk to her career and mine? That night, we met at her apartment again. The mood was sober, a far cry from the heady romance of previous meetings. She paced by the window, her silhouette backlit by the city lights. "We can't keep going like this," she admitted, turning to face me. "I won't lose everything I've built, but Her voice caught. "I can't bear to lose you either." A swell of emotion rose in my chest. I crossed the room and placed my hands on her shoulders. "Maybe we can still keep it secret. If we're more careful..." She gave a humorless laugh. "More careful than we've already been? This firm has eyes everywhere, and I'm your direct boss. That's not going to change. The policy is clear. Relationships with direct reports are strictly prohibited." Tears threatened to burn my eyes, though I fought them. "What do we do, then?" I asked, voice trembling. She closed her eyes for a moment. "I could request a transfer for you to a different department, but that process takes time, and there would still be questions about why." I swallowed hard. The only other option was for one of us to leave, and as I stared into her eyes, the painful reality slammed into me. She was too high up to simply resign. Her entire life was intertwined with this company. That left only me. A few days later, I submitted my resignation. Catherine asked me to come to her office, and I walked in to find her behind her imposing desk, the city skyline looming outside the window. She rose as soon as I entered, sadness etched into her usually unreadable features. "This is what you want?" she asked, her voice subdued, though I heard the heartbreak in it. I shook my head, swallowing a lump in my throat. "No, but it's the only way I see out of this mess. If I stay, it puts both of us at risk. An internal transfer would raise too many flags right now." She looked away, blinking rapidly. "I'll do whatever I can to help you find a position somewhere else. My contacts span several companies." I placed a trembling hand over hers on the desk. "Thank you. That would help." A charged silence settled between us. This was our goodbye, in a sense, though we both avoided speaking it out loud. My heart ached with the knowledge that we were sacrificing a connection that might have turned into something profound, all because of corporate rules and the fear of scandal. Was it the right decision? Or was I simply running away? She squeezed my hand softly, lifting her gaze to meet mine. "I wish I could fix this," she whispered, voice raw. "I care about you more than you know." My chest constricted. "I know," I managed to say, my voice faint. "I care about you too." No more words passed between us. We parted with a final, desperate kiss that neither of us had the emotional strength to resist. Tears dampened my cheeks as I left her office, a swirl of emotions churning in my stomach. Grief, regret, tenderness, and love, all bound together in a knot I couldn't unravel. In the following weeks, I quietly served out my notice period. I avoided Catherine's gaze in the hallways. We no longer met in secret. Everything returned to the professional facade, except for the heartbreak that gnawed at me each time I saw her silhouette in her office. On my last day, I slipped out without fanfare, carrying a small box of personal items from my cubicle. A few coworkers gave me perfunctory farewells. Some tried to pry about why I was leaving so soon, but I brushed them off with vague answers about better opportunities. The firm's official internal notice simply stated that I had chosen to pursue a new path. That evening, I found myself in my tiny apartment in Uptown, surrounded by half-packed boxes. Catherine had pulled some strings to help me land a new role at a smaller consultancy in the city. I appreciated the assistance, though it didn't ease the ache of leaving under these circumstances. I ran my fingers over my phone, wondering if I should call her, or if she'd call me, but neither of us did. Months have passed since then. I've settled into my new job, something less intense, more flexible. My new colleagues are friendly, the atmosphere more relaxed, and yet, I find myself missing the high-octane environment of my old workplace. More specifically, I miss her. The memory of Catherine's voice, her scent, and the way her eyes lit up whenever we connected. Those things linger like half-forgotten melodies. Every so often, I hear bits of news from old co-workers. Catherine led a major merger deal, or she reorganized the department. She's as successful as ever. Part of me feels a surge of pride on her behalf, while another part aches with the question, what if I had stayed? But I know the reality. If I had stayed, eventually everything would have collapsed in on us. Perhaps we would have gone public and faced the fallout. Perhaps it would have ended in scandal or broken careers. Or perhaps, in the best-case scenario, we would have found a miraculous solution. There's no way to know. What I do know is that my time with Catherine, short-lived as it was, changed me. It taught me how dangerous and powerful real connection can be, especially in the charged atmosphere of corporate life. It showed me that desire doesn't always obey the neat lines we draw to protect ourselves. And it proved that sometimes, choosing to let go is the only way to preserve the best parts of something fragile. I sometimes wonder if she thinks of me, if she ever regrets how things ended. Maybe she's relieved. Maybe she's found someone else, free of those pesky professional barriers. Or maybe she buries herself in work, letting her ambition keep her company in the lonely hours of the night. I'll never truly know. Still, a small flame of hope burns within me, the hope that one day, we might meet again in different circumstances. Perhaps then we could see if the sparks we felt for each other could ignite something lasting, far from the prying eyes and inflexible rules that drove us apart. Until that day comes, if it ever does, I carry the memories quietly, like a well-worn diary locked in a drawer. And so I ask you, if you were in my position, would you have stayed? Would you have risked everything, your career, your reputation, maybe even your self-respect, for the chance at a passion that could either crumble under scrutiny or blossom into something extraordinary? For me, the cost was simply too high. I chose self-preservation over love or lust or whatever it was that we shared. That is my story of what happened when my boss hit on me. It's a tale of ambition, secrecy, and undeniable chemistry, culminating in a bittersweet farewell. If nothing else, it taught me that life rarely fits the tidy boundaries we impose on it. Sometimes it sweeps you off your feet, depositing you far from where you ever thought you'd stand. And in those moments, all you can do is decide whether to embrace the risk or let it go. I chose to let it go. Yet I'll never forget the cold Chicago night when Catherine pressed her lips to mine under the fluorescent office lights. And I felt as though the rest of the world had vanished. Maybe if circumstances had been kinder, we would have found a path that allowed us to keep both our dignity and the spark between us. I still close my eyes sometimes and see the skyline from her apartment window, the warm glow of lamps casting dancing shadows on her walls. and the look in her eyes when she whispered that she cared about me more than I knew. In those fleeting recollections, I can almost imagine a different ending, one where we soared above the constraints of corporate rules. But life, as it is seldom that forgiving. This story remains a part of me, a chapter in my life defined not by an official job title or a line on my resume, but by a profound human connection that arrived too soon and ended too quickly. And maybe that's all right. Maybe some stories aren't meant to have a neat resolution. Maybe they exist only to remind us of the fierce power of desire and the unyielding boundaries we place between ourselves and the things we want. In the end, I made the decision I believed was right for me, for my career, and for Catherine as well, although I can't pretend to speak for her. Whether it truly was the right decision, I still can't say. But as I stand here, with my future unfolding in front of me, I take solace in knowing I followed the path my conscience demanded. Every so often, however, I pause at a window overlooking the city, see the lights stretching far into the distance, and let myself wonder just for a moment what might have been. And then I close my eyes, breathe in, and continue on, carrying the memory of Catherine Blake in a quiet corner of my heart.